like if it says 6:30, like we start at 6:30. So I was just kind of waiting for someone to come up and start this. And I'm standing up front, so that might be me. Nick, do you have, I feel like there's somebody else who wants to say something before we start. How's everybody? Thanks for coming out. It's not snowing yet, eh? Is it supposed to snow down here? Because I know in Brainerd on my ride home tonight, for those of you that don't know, I live in Brainerd. So I will be driving like 2 hours and change north when we're done. And it's supposed to get like 5 inches of snow up there tonight, overnight, which, yeah, that's the proper response. Snow in April, it was like the Prince song, right? Sometimes it snows in April. That was not a celebratory song. That was it's not supposed to snow in April. So are you getting snow here tonight?
Might get an inch.
An inch, okay. I heard something about like the Twins opener might be impaired because of snow later in the week. Is that true?
I don't know. I follow the Saints.
I was going to say, I don't think anyone would be really sad if the Twins opener is impaired. Do you want to say something before we start?
Sure, yeah.
I feel like you should.
Yes,
Yay.
Yeah. Thank you. Oh, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Thank you all for being here. This is great turnout. And thank you, Chuck, for generously donating your time tonight and to the MERPs today in the afternoon in the lounge. It's been a great day. And just to kind of recap, it's not just the material that we're talking about related to the housing crisis, but I think what Chuck has demonstrated throughout his time at Strong Towns, throughout his career, is that we really have the potential with our Humphrey education, class of 2002 MERP, that you can do a lot with that and make an impact in the world. And the fact that you've chosen to do that from your home state of Minnesota, I think, is a testament to this program and to this state. And I think we're just really grateful to have you here and to learn a little something about the housing trap. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, friend. So who in the room is a MERP student? Wow. Like current MERP student or graduate MERP? Wow, that's a way bigger class than I thought. Very cool. How many MPP students are in the room? A handful? Very nice. I want to show you something cool. How many civil engineering students are in the room? There we go. Nice crossover. That's great. How many alumni are in the room who are not current students but came here? Very nice. Welcome. Thank you for coming out tonight. I will say the intention here, and I'm going to take 99% of the blame. All right? And I'm not putting the other 1% on you. I'm putting it on other people. Okay? But I'm taking 90%. We wanted to do this as a really fun day, which we've had. I got to meet with civil engineering students. I got to meet with MERP students, and both of those, for me, were really energizing. We also wanted to take a moment from a Humphrey standpoint and just talk about the importance of this school. The Humphrey School is, I remember when I came here and I walked in the door and there was a poster that stuck with me. It had the Lincoln Memorial on it, and it had the Washington Monument on it, and then it had the Humphrey School on it. And it had some words on it. I can't remember exactly what they were, but the impression was, we have the great president in George Washington, this great public figure, and we built a monument to, in a sense, to him and his greatness. We had Abraham Lincoln, who was a great public leader, and we built this memorial in honor of him. And we had this great leader in Hubert Humphrey, and the legacy of that is this school. And to me, that was really powerful because I always told my wife, like, never let them name a road after me, because roads start to go bad and start to, but a school, like a place like this, it's one of those things that multiplies across generations. There are so many graduates here that I run into in everyday life that are out doing some of the most important things in this state, some of the most important things in other states. When I tell people that I'm a graduate of the Humphrey School, it gives me a lot of pride to be able to say that. I went here as an undergrad and got my undergrad degree in the civil engineering department. Went and worked for 5 years and then came back here and got my graduate degree. My wife also went to University of Minnesota. We were both from Brainerd, and we were dating in junior high and high school and came here together, although not because of the other one. She was a journalist. In fact, in Minnesota, more people know my wife than me. If you listen to public radio and ever hear Chuck Marohn, that is my wife. Most of those reports are being assembled in my attic of our house, so you can imagine that. That's my wife. And then I have 2 daughters. Chloe is a junior at the University of Minnesota. She's studying physiology. She actually right now is in Costa Rica doing study abroad. But I love coming here and having her experience this place the way that I did. It's as a dad, it's really fun to watch your daughter doing cool things. My other daughter is at the University of Arizona. She is studying astronomy, astrophysics, astrobiology. She is super psyched right now because we have astronauts in space as of like 45 minutes ago, which is wild, which is really cool. And their basketball team's in the Final Four, which she thinks happens every year. And I try to tell her, like, no, it won't happen every year, but it's very cool for her to be doing that. So when I got invited the opportunity to come back here, I just want to make sure that we recognize the importance of this institution. I'm on the advisory board here, and I think being on the advisory board, one of the things that you start to appreciate is not just how important the place is, but how dependent on the goodwill of the community, the functioning of a place like this is. Obviously, things that require federal funding, which universities tend to be in that flow somewhere, have had a lot of volatility over the last couple years. We had a traumatic experience here this past year, in the last few months, and that had a huge effect on the school. And I think one of the things that made me very proud was the way that this institution in particular dug into funders and donors and alumni and people who were local to help support families that had students at school who all of a sudden couldn't work or had their aid cut or experienced some other life event due to things outside of our control. And it gave me a lot of pride to watch the community here come together and support the students in their pursuit of, not just their academics, but their, whole kind of professional, personal life and their personal growth. So I just wanted to start this by saying, thanks for the invitation to the students who brought me here, and then also, for the hard work that you're putting in to get your degree. And thank you to everyone who's supported this institution. I remember there were many years where the people would call me and say, hey, would you like to make a donation to the University of Minnesota? And I said, I'm still paying my tuition back, so maybe call me after that's done. But I do it with pride now. And this is one of those places where I feel like the dollars we can give are dollars well spent. And when you look around the room at the people who raise their hand, you're supporting like their trajectory in life. Let's talk housing. I've written 3 books and working on a 4th. This is the 3rd book, and they asked me tonight to chat about this. I'm happy when we get to the end here to talk about anything that you all want to talk about. We don't have to stick to this. But let's do this because this is probably the most urgent urban issue today as I travel around the country, as I travel around the world. Housing. I just got back from a week in New Zealand. The number 1 issue in New Zealand right now, oil prices. They're a rock in the middle of the South Pacific. All their oil comes from one place. They don't have any of their own. So urgent issue. Urgent issue number 2, housing. Much like there, here we are having 2 separate housing conversations. One of these conversations about housing is housing as shelter, the place where we live. And I think when we think about the students here at the Humphrey School and the dialogue we have here around housing, it tends to be obsessively about this conversation. How do we get people into housing? How do we get people into housing that's affordable? How do we structure society so that we can deliver housing to people where they are? The other conversation that is going on about housing is housing as a financial product. More specifically, housing mortgages and related financial products, how those are performing in a marketplace, and how those fit into the overall funding and stability of our financial system. If you examine these 2 conversations, in one of them, housing prices need to fall. Now, we could technically say, okay, wages need to go up, housing prices need to fall, some combination of them. But housing is unaffordable now because it's priced too high. And we need to have some kind of balance between what people and what households make and what housing actually costs. In the other conversation, housing prices cannot be allowed to fall. Because housing prices and all of the derivative products made from them, they are the foundation of our banking system, our pension system, our insurance system, and every place that we look to for financial stability. This tension between these 2 realities is what we call the housing trap. We have created for ourselves a system where housing prices are unaffordable for most people. Yet, if housing becomes more affordable, it wrecks our overall economy and undermines the stability of the financial system. This is a trap that we created, and it is one that we must resolve in order to take care of these joint issues. Let me walk through, and I do like 3 chapters of the book on how we created this trap and got ourselves into it. I want to do this in a fairly judicious way. Let me walk you through how we used to do housing, let's say 100 years ago, but before the Great Depression. And really, before the Great Depression, going back kind of indefinitely into time, housing was a very localized product. If you were going to get a mortgage on a home in 1926 Minneapolis, you were going to have a 50% down payment. You were going to have that home financed for you over a 3, 4, 5-year period. It would be an interest-only loan. And at the end, you would have a large balloon payment. And, in circumstances, you would maybe pay some of that principal down. But in other circumstances, you would be looking at just rolling that 50% over into a new mortgage. You could borrow, in a sense, half of the home value. That would have been a very kind of common way to do things. Let's make sure we are on the same page. This was not done because the people were backward or didn't understand finance. It was done because it was very, very local. You guys have all seen the Christmas show, George, It's a Wonderful Life. Thank you. I always forget that. George Bailey, they're having the run on the bank, and he's like, but your money's in her house, and your money's in his house. Like, that seems quaint to us, but that's actually how it worked. And the bank wasn't going to make a big loan where they didn't have enough equity, because they were literally taking your money and lending it to you, and taking your money and lending it to you. That was how it worked. And so if the bank was doing risky stuff, what were you all going to do? Go get your money out, and then the bank would fail. And so, in a sense, the localization of this made it very conservative, not politically conservative, fiscally conservative in how it operated. In a sense, this changed in the Great Depression, and it changed for a number of reasons that I am going to describe to you initially as very moral reasons. And let me walk you through that. If you had a mortgage and you borrowed 50% of your home value, what happened to home values during the Great Depression? They went down. So let's say your 3-year, 4-year, 5-year balloon comes due, and you go to the bank and you say, all right, I got this big balloon payment, I want to refinance it in a new house. The bank would say, okay, great, your house is worth less, so we will actually lend you less now. The difference between what you owe and what the bank will lend you, you need to come up with in cash. In the Great Depression, 25+% unemployment, huge industrial dislocation, very, very difficult financial times. A lot of people who could pay the payment, in other words, they were not in default, they were not unwilling to continue to make the payments, lost their house because they couldn't come up with this cash gap. And so a lot of people, through no fault of their own, went into foreclosure. What happens when a bank forecloses on a home? What does the bank do with it? They sell it. They sell it off into the marketplace. What happens when you have a declining housing market and you sell houses into it? It drives down the price, right? What happens to the next person then who has to go to refinance? Their gap is bigger. They get foreclosed on. Their house gets sold. The gap is bigger, bigger, bigger. What we were in the Great Depression was what economists call a deflationary spiral. The worse it got, the worse it got. At the beginning of the Roosevelt administration, the federal government stepped in and said, we have to stop this downward spiral. We have to arrest the decline. And so what they did is they had a number of policies that they tried. The first thing they did is they went to local banks and they said, stop foreclosing. If you're going to foreclose, we will buy the loan from you. We, the federal government, will buy it. So you don't have to foreclose. Here's your money. Give us the mortgage. And then they would go to the homeowners and they would say, how would you like to refinance with the federal government? We'll refinance that over a 9-year period, a 10-year period, a 12-year period of time. And instead of paying interest only, how about you pay interest and principal? Pay that thing down so you can ultimately own that home outright. It's a very good deal to keep people in their houses. This was a temporary measure. As a longer-term measure, the federal government went to local banks and they said, hey, we would like you to write more loans. How about instead of requiring a 50% down payment, you only require a 40%? Then people won't have as big a gap to make up, or they won't have any gap at all. How about 40%? And we know that that is riskier for you. We know you don't want to take risk at the local level like that, at a local bank. And so we will create insurance to go along with that product that will be backed by the federal government. So if the loan does default, we'll make you whole as a bank. We'll take care of you. All right, instead of 40% down, how about 30% down? And the insurance policy just got like a little more expensive, a little bigger. Ultimately, the federal government created an organization called Fannie Mae. And the idea of Fannie Mae was if you wrote a mortgage that met certain criteria, and I'm saying this in a really positive way because I think if you were looking at it from the federal government, you were like, we're trying to help. I think in this school in particular, we've had a lot of, I'm sure, classes where we talked about redlining. This is like derivations of that come through this. But the idea was if you could check certain boxes, it was in the right neighborhood, there was enough equity, there was a right price. If it was a qualifying loan, the federal government would buy it from the local bank if the local bank ever wanted to sell it. There were two reasons for this. The first is the federal government wanted the local banks to write a lot of loans. So instead of holding the loan on their books, they could get rid of the loan to the federal government, have the cash, and then go make more loans. The idea was, let's get more people buying houses. The second thing was, if the loan started to, in a sense, go underwater, and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, the federal government would bail out the local bank. I'm going to use the word again, moral. I feel like I had a grandfather, my grandparents grew up during the Great Depression, but I had a grandfather that I talked to about this when he was still alive, about this, the entire kind of Great Depression. And I just walked away from those conversations thinking this was a really difficult time to be alive. In fact, we're in Minnesota, I think I can say this in like a personal way. My grandfather was a Marine in World War II. He was actually the first group that went into Nagasaki after they dropped the bomb. He would talk all about the war, would not talk about that. Really amazing person. He described his experience in the Depression. I won't go into all the details, but basically like his mother passed away when he was little. His dad had alcohol problems. He wound up living with a family up the road, and they fed him and allowed him to sleep in the barn, and he worked the farm. That was basically like how he survived as a teenager. He told me that he felt lucky, that he was more fortunate than many people during that time. He lived in a barn in Minnesota in the winter, and he said he's fortunate. What I took away from those conversations was that this is a different level of hardship than what any of us, for the most part, understand, right? Like this was really, really hard. And so the idea of keeping people in their house, I tend to not talk in strong downs in terms of morality, but this is one place where I feel like the urgency to do something to keep people in their homes has a really strong moral dimension to it. All right. What is the thing that we are told got us out of the Great Depression? World War II. I want to pause on that for a second because that's the most like messed up thing ever. We are all taught basically in junior high that the thing that got us out of the Great Depression was World War II. We live in a world, a culture, because I asked the same question in New Zealand and they did not have the same answer. We live in a culture here in North America that is dominated by the thinking of economists. Only an economist who's looking at spreadsheets and counting beans says 1932 to 1939, 1940, ooh, bad. Ooh, 1941, yay. We got our mojo back, like good times. World War II is not a good time. Yes, we had full employment because we sent millions of people overseas to kill and to die, and took millions of other people and put them into factories, building things that we were just gonna blow up. We rationed gas, we rationed butter, we rationed meat. This was not a great time to be alive. But if you were an economist, hey, GDP is growing again. Hey, unemployment is down. Hey, the numbers that I track are doing great. That's a warped view. But it's the view we're all taught. The thing that got us out of the Great Depression is World War II. As the war was progressing, it was very clear that we were going to win. Let's be clear. World War I, it was not clear who was going to win till like the last 6 months. World War II, it was clear on like December 8th, 1941, who was going to win. It was just a matter of like how long it would take and what the cost would be. As the war was in like the mid 40s, there was like 43. The economists started to meet and talk about what the post-war world, economic world would look like. And there was some panic amongst the advisors to President Roosevelt. This is a memo from Paul Samuelson, probably like the premier US economist of the last century. If the war were to end suddenly, like if we suddenly won, if there was a surrender, we are going to usher in the greatest period of economic dislocation any economy's ever seen. In other words, if we bring all these troops home and shut down all these industries of war, we're just going to slide right back into the depths of the Great Depression. There's nothing really different about the economy today than there was 10 years ago, and we shut off this great stimulus, it's over. Is that what happened? No, that's not what happened, right? What happened is we did win the war, the troops came home, we shut down those industries, and we did something utterly radical that in retrospect we kind of just take for granted as the way things are. We turned cities into machines of growth. We looked at our landscape and we said, we can grow our cities and essentially replace the war economy with a peace economy. And in doing so, we can build a middle class, create a higher standard of living, build what was become to be known as the American dream. We can create this engine of growth and prosperity. And all we have to do at the federal government level is invest in infrastructure, invest in commercial growth, invest in debt markets, and what we did from a housing standpoint is we looked at all those programs we had put in place to stop housing prices from falling and said, do you know what? We can just repurpose those same programs to make housing prices go up, to create more demand for housing, to turn our cities into grow. And that's what we did. Instead of 40% down payment, how about 30%? How about 20%? How about 10%? How about 5%? How about no down payment? How about down payment assistance? Instead of 10% interest rates, how about 8%? How about 6? How about 4? How about 3? My mortgage is at 3 5/8. How about that? We put systems in place to create a market for housing that would allow more people to borrow more money and ultimately to pay more for housing. We made it easier for these transactions to happen. 15-year mortgage, great. How about a 20-year mortgage? How about a 30-year mortgage? We'll spread those payments out over a longer period of time. This was wildly successful. I'm an engineer. Engineers love charts, right, guys? Yeah, you with me? So I always feel like I got to show some charts in my presentation just to have cred. This is from 1945 to 1970, so the first 25 years at the end of World War II. Here's what our economy did. This is our gross domestic product. Again, the kind of the biggest boom that any modern economy has experienced. It was us at the end of World War II. At the same time, our national debt grew, but by a much smaller amount. The debt was at historically high levels at the end of the Depression of World War II. What happened with this high levels of growth and moderate levels of debt growth is that we were able to reduce this debt to GDP ratio, which is like a key indicator for economists of economic health. I want to pause here again and point out the world that we live in that is dominated by economists and economic thinking. Every time in my adult life that we have gotten into financial trouble, it doesn't matter if it is a left of center government or a right of center government or whatever we have now, like I don't even know what we have anymore. The prescription has always been, we grow our way out of this. What combination of tax cuts or retraining subsidies or business assistance or programs can we do and put in place that will allow our economy to grow? Because if we can grow our way out of the problems we have. That was a lesson that we learned at the end of World War II. It's sitting up here on the board. What I think is left out of this lesson is where the growth actually came from. Because yes, the federal government debt hardly grew during this period of time, but what did grow is private mortgage debt. Private mortgage debt started to, in a sense, dominate the economy. The money that was being pumped into our economy was coming from families who were in the past taking on 3, 4, 5-year loans with 50% down payments, higher interest rates and all that, now taking on 30-year mortgages and financing this massive capital project over multiple decades, basically over a generation of their lives. More charts. This is the Case-Shiller Index. This index looks at housing prices over time. in relation to wages, or family income. If you think of like, if everybody in Minnesota had their salary magically double tomorrow, what would happen to housing prices? Would they become affordable suddenly? No, housing prices would double overnight. That's what would happen. So what this chart looks at is kind of those two working together. So when you see it goes up, what you're seeing is a distortion off of like family wages, right? Again, I start this at the end of World War II. It goes back to 1890, but I started at the end of World War II. And I want to walk you through this chart because it really tells the story of what happened with housing post-war. You can see here, at the end of the war, we had this period of volatility. This is where we get like the GI Bill. And I didn't really go into the GI Bill in the presentation, but you know, the GI Bill was designed to help returning soldiers get into a house and acclimate. We kind of celebrate this. It very quickly like extended to spouses of a deceased service members. Then it like extended to if you knew a service member. Like it was such a good program to build more houses that it became very liberalized very quickly and then just went away and was incorporated into the overall housing program. This is the volatility you see at the very beginning where we're trying to get this established. Then you see this long period of time where housing prices drop slowly year after year after year. This is the economy becoming more efficient at delivering this product. Think of how like cell phones, this is not really a good example anymore, but like flat screen TVs, when they first came out, brutally expensive, not very big. Now they get bigger and bigger and bigger and the price goes down and down and down. Why? It's not because we become smarter at this, it's because the supply chains thicken up. We figure out logistically how to do this more efficiently. We build out and the price per unit comes down. That's what you're seeing here for 2.5 decades. You're seeing the price go down, down, down. At the end of the 1960s, we had an episode of high inflation. Now, we have had an episode of high inflation, so we've experienced what happens when that happens, right? It doesn't feel good. Prices are starting to climb in ways that are really disorienting. Their inflation back at the end of the 60s was much greater than what we had during COVID, right? It was way higher. What happened to interest rates when inflation went up for us? Interest rates also go up. Why do interest rates go up? If you are losing 5%, 8%, 10% a year to inflation, you're not going to lend someone money at 3%, 4%. You're going to ask for more than what you're losing, or you're going to put your money into real estate or something else. So if there's going to be cash in the market, interest rates are going to have to go up to make that cash appear. Okay, this is the problem. And this is what essentially the conundrum that we put banks into in the 1930s. Banking, prior to the Great Depression, in the couple decades after the Great Depression, was a very simple undertaking. In fact, I've heard it described as the 363 principle. You borrow money at 3%, you lend that money out at 6%, and you go to the golf course at 3 p.m. every day. There's not a lot of difficulty here, right? That difference between the 3% you borrow and the 6% you lend, that's your profit, that's your spread, right? Who, in this period of time, who does a bank borrow from? They borrow from depositors. This is the George Bailey thing, right? Everybody is putting their money into the bank. You're being paid 3% for your money being there. Depositors are the most fickle short-term lenders, right? Because if you decide today to want your money back, you can just go get your money back. It's not like if you do a CD, you might lock it up for 6 months or 12 months. That's why CDs pay higher interest rates, because you lock up the money. But if you're just a depositor, you can go get your money back anytime. So the bank can lose all its deposits theoretically in an instant if people go get their money, okay? So you have to put a deposit at 3%. The bank has lent that out for 30 years at 6%, and now inflation goes up to 8%. How much interest do you want on your money on deposit? Do you want 3% anymore? No. You're going to want 9%, 10%, or something more. So the bank now has two options. Option number one, they continue to pay 3% because they're only getting 6% from the loans they've made. That's going to go on for decades. Like, they're stuck with those loans. They made it. They're going to pay 6%, so they're only going to pay you 3%. What are you going to do with your money? You're going to take it out and go to a different bank. That bank's going to go bankrupt immediately. The other option they have is to pay you the 10% and lose money every month, because they got to pay you 10, but they only have 6 coming in. Do you see the problem? Okay, go back to 1925. What would happen? Well, every 3, 4, 5 years, the whole portfolio would roll over. So if you had a period of high inflation or high interest rates, you would refinance the next time around at higher interest rates. So your portfolio would bleed to death, but bleed slowly, and there was an end to the bleeding. You could roll it over. You could make it work. This is why banks don't do long-term financing, or would never do it naturally. But the federal government induced them to do these long-term loans. And so all of a sudden, at the end of the 1960s, all these places were underwater. What you see here, in this period of time right here, is housing prices going up and then a crash. That crash was banks failing, lending pulling back, the economy no longer working. I'm going to say this kind of like it is right now. Okay? All right. What you are looking at right here is, you can think of as like the first post-war bank bailout. Because what did the federal government do? They went and created another entity called Freddie Mac. They created another entity called Ginnie Mae. And they went to all the banks and they said, you've got what are essentially bad loans now. You've got loans that are paying this much. You've got to pay out this much. We, the federal government, will buy those loans. So we will buy them from you. We will get 3%. And you can create new loans and get 10%. That's a bank bailout. That's what we did. And we did that because otherwise all the banks would have failed, because they were all carrying long-term crazy loans on their books. In order to finance this, what the federal government did is they created this thing called a mortgage-backed security. So this is what Ginnie Mae was about. Ginnie Mae took all those loans. Ginnie Mae was only allowed to take the most secure of the secure loans. So again, if we go back to the redlining maps, they were in the green and the blue areas, not the yellow and the red areas. They could take those loans and they would bundle them all together and they would chop them up into securities and they would sell them to investors and to banks. That was the first bailout. In the 1970s, we had a second inflationary run, and in the early 1980s, we had, in a sense, like a repeat of this process. The difference in the 1980s is that Congress passed a law that said banks, because banks are regulated by the federal government, banks have to hold a certain amount as reserve. So banks have to have literally like cash or short-term treasury notes on their books. What the federal government said is, instead of cash or a treasury note, you can hold, as a bank, for your reserves, AAA-rated mortgage-backed securities. So you can own, as your reserves, a collection of housing loans. The great thing about this was that where a treasury might pay 3%, a mortgage-backed security would pay 5 or 6%. If I'm telling you as a bank, hey, you got to hold reserves, would you rather have your reserves at 3% or would you rather have your reserves at 6%? So what this did is created a lot of demand for more mortgages. It got the market going again. In the early 1980s, after we went through that second bubble and had the bank bailout problem, the FSLIC, it's the FDIC. We're all familiar today with the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation that insures your bank deposits. This is the SNL version of that. So it's truly like the George Bailey version of that. That entity had $10 billion of insurance payments to pay out insolvent banks, basically like to make depositors whole if the bank failed. The bank insolvencies at that point was over 140 billion. Those numbers sound quaint today because we deal in trillions now in insane ways, but that would be like today going and saying it's $10 trillion. Like it was an insane amount of money, an amount of money that like no one could get their mind wrapped around. And so, like the economists taught us, what we were going to do is deregulate the market and grow our way out of this problem. That resulted in this third bubble here. This is the S&L bubble, where S&Ls literally were like consolidating on paper. I'll try to give you a glimpse of how crazy this was. You have an S&L, let's say this S&L is insolvent by the tune of $1 billion. I go and buy that S&L and I pay $1 billion for it. Then when I bring it on my books, even though it's worth minus $1 billion, right? When I bring it on my books, I can claim now that it's worth $1 billion because that was the market price that someone paid for it, me. And so now I have $1 billion asset on my books, even though if you dug into it, it's worth minus $1 billion. That was done over and over and over and over and over in like a daisy chain of fraud. That's what that bubble is. When that bubble burst, we had another crash, and then we had what I think can only be called like the deregulation or the decentralization bubble. The S&L was the deregulation bubble. The 1990s and early 2000s, we call this the subprime bubble now. It was really a bubble of decentralization. And I think the best way to think of this is like the credit score, which is ubiquitous now. We all know credit score, right? You know your credit score, roughly? You get it emailed to you like every week, like I do, for no good, like I never asked, but they just email it to me. Okay. In the 1990s, and this is a Bill Clinton administration, they actually brought together industry and housing and said, how do we make housing, we got to make this number go up. We have a problem, it's crashing, we got to make things go up. How do we make housing more accessible to more people? How do we get more people in homes? And when this got to the George W. Bush administration, it was how do we have an ownership society, get more people owning homes? I think you can think of this as like the credit score. The credit score was seen as a way to overcome things like structural racism. So a family would go to get a home loan on a house, and they would get approved. And then another family would go to get a home loan, have the same exact job, income. In fact, they would run these tests where they would be like, white family does it, non-white family does it, and the non-white family would get rejected for no like number reason. It was the same literal application. It was just like sometimes a different name on the application. The idea of the credit score was that it would be blind to all that. And so if you qualified on the credit score, you were deemed worthy. Okay. Sometimes you could get really high credit by just getting I told you guys today about going to McDonald's and getting credit cards to get like my free meal when you were an undergrad. When I was an undergrad here in the 90s, you could literally go to the Dinky Dome and there would be like a dude standing outside hawking credit cards. Like MasterCard was trying to sell you a credit card. College students, dumb, whatever. But if you signed up, they gave you a voucher for like a Taco Bell meal or whatever. And we were all broke. So like we signed up and put the wrong social security number down and the wrong address and whatever, and got our meal and went back and did that like over and over and over again. If we had taken that more seriously and actually done it, what you would have had is like a bunch of credit cards with no balances. You would have had great credit. You could have had a really high credit score. And then they would give you a house. When I was a grad student here, my wife and I bought a house in Elk River. She worked in St. Cloud at the time for the St. Cloud Times. I was going to school here. Our compromise was we were going to live in between, so neither of our commutes were overly burdened, or equally burdened, I guess. When we sold that house after grad school, the people who bought it had no job. I mean, we had their stuff, so I knew they had no job. They showed up and were very young looking and not well put together looking. It's an impression, it might not be correct, but history kind of proved out. They had a first mortgage that was 80%. That was what the federal government would, because they qualified for the federal government programs for first-time homeowner or whatever, 80% or 90%. They had a second mortgage, which was a local bank had written them a second mortgage for the difference between what the federal government was. Then they had a third mortgage that was filling the last little gap. And they actually bid more on the house than what we were asking for it by a substantial margin, which made no sense to us because we had no other bidder. That amount at closing was given to the realtor as a bonus, and the realtor used it to write the check for the first 3 months' mortgage payment, because that's what it took to clear out of the local bank and get onto the books of the bundlers so no one locally would have responsibility. That's what that bubble is. Repeated over and over and over and over, right? Yeah, you shake your head like that's crazy. That's absolutely friggin' crazy. That's the market we were in. That's what was going on. And, you know, for those of you that have watched the movie The Big Short, read the book. The book is way better. For those of you that have watched or read the book, you know, you see a hyper crazy version and you read it and you're like, there's no way. Yeah, like this was going on here, like everywhere. These four bubbles. I want to point out something about this. I said, this is a period of efficiency, and then you start seeing these bubbles come in. Each of them in amplitude grows. Each of them is bigger than the last one. And what you are watching is the housing market become less of a localized product and more of a financialized product. You are watching housing over time become more and more financialized. This is the creation of the trap. What this means is that these are financial products. That's primarily what their value is in our economy today. Yes, they serve as shelter, but, you know, where's my MERP students? You guys talk about missing middle housing, right? Oh, we want missing middle housing. We want infill. Like, what? Okay, you know what those are? Those are crappy financial products. If you go out and build single-family homes or duplexes, you can find the same product being built anywhere around the country. You can take the mortgage based off of that product, bundle it with other similar mortgages, securitize it, hypothecate those, sell those off to pension funds and insurance companies. There's an unlimited market for those. Unlimited market. You start to build some funky little like infill thing, there's no secondary market for that. Like it doesn't exist in the fluid way that this does. You see the proliferation of 5/1s? I was on the Turtle Mountain Reservation in North Dakota. One of the, I want to say this in a respectful way, but this is, I mean, they said things that were less respectful than what I'm going to say. One of the poorest, most struggling reservations in North America, I mean, in our country. Beautiful people, wonderful things happening, very sad place. When I was there, I came across a 5/1. This is a 36 square mile area with like 800 people living in it. Why are they building that? I can tell you why they're building that, because you can get unlimited amounts of liquidity to build that. Any place that a developer will build one of those, they can get the financing. And they can get the financing because that can be bundled with other products at many different price points in Minneapolis, in Seattle, in Dallas, in New York, in small towns all over the place. They're the same product. They're bundled up, securitized, and sold off. There's tons of money to do this stuff because they're easily securitizable. What we live in is a world where We think that the consumer is the person buying the house and the product is the house. And the reality is that the consumer is the financial system and the product is the mortgage and the promise to pay part of your earnings for decades to pay down that debt. You are the product. That's what's setting the prices in our economy today. So, here's where we're at now. And again, I'm gonna pick on economists one more time. If you listen to economists talk about the period between the mid-1990s and 2008, particularly like 2001 to 2008, they will freely talk about that as a housing bubble. They might say subprime bubble, but they will say bubble. What is a bubble in financial terms? It is a distortion of reality. Those same economists talk about the period of time from 2012 to now, 2012 to 2021, 2020, like before the pandemic. They will talk about it in the same paragraph as a housing recovery. How do you recover to a bubble condition? How do you, like, we're gonna, give us back our unsustainability, right? This makes no sense. No sense at all. This is the trap we have made for ourselves. Here's the conclusion that I want you to walk out of here with. Making it easier for more people to borrow more money and to pay more for housing is not the answer. I'm willing to concede that during the Great Depression, this was a moral thing to do and that this was the answer. And I'm not trying to question those policies or the people who did that. I can even kind of understand how the people at the end of the World War II did not want to go back into the Great Depression and said, like, look, this is working, like, let's continue doing this. Let's not even debate that. But we've now gone through multiple iterations of this. And we are past the point where continuing down this path makes any sense. Now, I don't want to make our conversation partisan. Strong Towns is, I'm not going to say we're nonpartisan. We are nonpartisan, but I'm actually going to say that we do not engage with national politics. It's not just nonpartisan. We're very focused on local government and what we can do together, bottom up in a place. And so our conversation about the top levels of government are almost non-existent. I'm going to share this with you, not to inflame the conversation, but just to reinforce this point here. Because the way that the system tries to save itself, in fact, let me put it this way. In the last presidential election, we had two parties, and they both had a housing plan. The party that lost, their housing plan was to, in a sense, subsidize demand in order to make housing more affordable for favored groups of people. We will help you with down payment assistance. We will help you cover your mortgage. We will help you get into a loan. Again, not lower prices, allow you to pay higher prices. We have programs to allow you to pay higher prices. The party that won had really two planks to their plan on housing. The first one was, we're going to privatize Fannie and Freddie. Understand, Fannie and Freddie were private. In 2008, when they failed, the federal government took them over, bailed them out, and now the federal government wants to privatize them again, and I'll fill in the rest, so they can make riskier loans again. In other words, so they can lend money to people who really can't afford houses. That's what it is. Again, to make housing, quote, more affordable. That's their plan. The other part of their plan was this, which they actually said it was behind, and then the president came out and said, we floated this idea of 50-year mortgages. So basically, if you can't afford the house when we finance it over 30 years, let's do a good, debt broker, real estate guy. Let's just finance that over 50 years. We'll lower the payment, we'll get you in, It's like you used to buy a car, you do a 3-year loan, and then when 4-year loans came out, everyone was like, oh my gosh, finance your car over 4 years? And now they're like, what, like 12-year loans for a car? Like, it's insane. It's not like you're getting a better car, you're financing it over a longer period of time. You owe money longer. This is the way to get people into housing at high prices. We actually need prices to adjust to what people can afford. If you listen to, now I'm going to say something that is less nice. If you listen to the broad range of political actors, and you listen to the broad range of activists and advocates on housing that are engaging primarily with those actors at that level, the groups that are lobbying the legislature and the federal government and trying to get, the paradigm that they all agree on is that housing is not affordable and we need to be able to get people into housing in a sense without changing the underlying financial part of the system. They acquiesce to the trap. I want to show you how we escape the trap. If we recognize that these are financial products, primarily, secondarily, they are homes we live in, but primarily in our economy, they serve as financial products. It gives us an insight onto where the gap in the market is. This is just a regular bell curve. Don't look too deeply into this. What I'm trying to demonstrate here is that most of the capital deployed for housing in our system is deployed for these two products. That's where like almost all the capital is. There's some capital that is deployed for very wealthy people's housing. I know we get all incensed, you know, Elon Musk owns 3 homes or whatever, I don't really care. But you know, we get all bent out of shape when a movie star has like 3 homes. People at that end of the spectrum don't have difficulty financing housing, right? There's no like liquidity problem. Where there is massive demand and no money at all is at the entry-level end of the market. It is impossible to get a mortgage at this end of the market. It's impossible to get local financing at this end of the market. Local banks don't hold those loans. There's no secondary market to sell them on. And let me give you an example from Detroit, just so we're kind of thinking about this on the same page. In Detroit, there were a number of homes. There was a group, in fact, Rocket Mortgage, who I think is like a bad player in the system. But Rocket Mortgage had a philanthropic arm. And they were trying, because they're based in Detroit, they were trying to help Detroit homeowners. And so I was affiliated with this group that was out trying to solve this problem. Here was the problem they were trying to solve. You had homes in Detroit that would go into tax foreclosure, meaning the owner of the home didn't pay the taxes. It would go into tax foreclosure. The owner of the home was a landlord who didn't pay their taxes. That was actually part of their business plan, was to not pay their taxes. They had a renter in the home, and the renter would be paying $500, $600, $800 a month, and when the home went into foreclosure, the renter would get kicked out. They would get foreclosed on. They would have to leave. The house would then get sold at auction, and the price at the auction was the back taxes, $15,000, $18,000. The landlord, and maybe it was a different one, or it was like this was like a group of people who were doing this, would go buy it at auction and rent it out again. Now, for those of you not great at math, if you pay $500 a month, that's $6,000 a year. You can own that house outright in 3 years, 3.5 years with interest. Why did the people who were living in it not buy it? They didn't have $18,000 in cash, and there's no mortgage for $18,000. No bank will write you that loan and hold it on their books because it's too risky for them. No bank can sell it onto a secondary market because no secondary market will take an $18,000 mortgage. And so that property is not financeable except by slumlords with cash. You following me? So there's a whole segment of the market here where there's tremendous demand for housing and there's no capital to finance it. No capital at all. This is the problem we're going to attack. What do the houses at that end of the market look like? A lot of times they look like a regular single-family home. In a single-family home, you might have someone who has lived in it for generations, has lived in it for decades, is house rich and cash poor. They might be looking at having to fix their roof for $20,000 or having to replace the heater for $15,000, and they just don't have the money. Our system today would say, get a reverse mortgage or sell that home and move into a retirement community or do something else. But a lot of people, this is where I raise my kids. This is where my spouse and I live. I have memories here. I've got friends up the street. I go to the church and volunteer. Like, I'm part of this neighborhood. I don't want to move out. In the past, what would have happened is that this person would have taken one of their extra 3 bedrooms, put an exterior door on it, put a kitchenette in there, and rented it out to someone. Now, think of that again in moral terms. We're allowing someone to stay in their house. We're allowing someone the dignity of being in their place. But you also, and I'm not trying to like over nostalgize this, but if you're an elderly person, it would be really great to have someone there who can maybe, as part of reducing the rent, take you to the grocery store every couple weeks, or shovel the sidewalk for you, or mow the yard for you in exchange for a little bit lower rent. These are good transactions for everyone. We make this kind of thing illegal to do in our system. Illegal, and when it's not illegal, very, very difficult to do. Backyard cottages. For those of you in the business who like to call these ADUs, please stop. An ADU sounds like a disease that you catch, and I realize that in a zoning code, they're called accessory dwelling units. If you want people to actually understand this, call them backyard cottages. These are great for like I think the way to think about these, or the way that I talk about them to get people interested, you could put your mother-in-law in a retirement home, or you can allow her to live in her dignity in her own place in the extra space you have in your backyard, and be there to help you look after the kids, and be there to talk at the fireplace in the evening, and be there to help her when she needs it. And I think we can all get our minds around the mother-in-law. But when you build these for the mother-in-law, they're really great. And then ultimately she moves out, and then you've got the divorcee who is recovering from alcoholism, who needs a place to crash for a few months. And it works for them too, because they actually need a house. Or the college student who wants to live somewhere, or the young married couple who's just getting started, who's fine with a 500 square foot unit for the first couple years of their life. They can live here and save some money and then enter the other system with savings instead of in desperation. These places provide tons and tons of flexibility for us. This is something that in my town we call a tiny house. My ancestors in the same city would have called this a house. We have put the adjective tiny on the front of this, and so if you want to build a tiny house, you have to meet all the requirements of a house, and then you have to meet subpart A through M of the tiny house provisions. You have to go beg permission from your neighbors. You have to genuflect in front of the planning board. You have to demonstrate that you're not creating chaos and mayhem by building what everybody else throughout all of human history around the world would recognize as a starter home. How many people in this room want to live in a 400, 500, 600 square foot house? A handful. How many people in this room have at one point in their life lived in a 400, 500, 600 square foot place? Right? Almost all of us have. This is where you start. And when we get rid of the bottom rung, we actually arrest family development, community development, neighborhood development. We make it harder for people to get started. The thing about these kind of houses is they can go in all over the place. You go through Minneapolis now, and you guys we've become very good here at building these. They've been legal now for a while, and you see them creeping into neighborhoods all over the place. The interesting thing is that you can have them be built and people won't even, I would say, if you can go away on vacation for 3 months, come back, and you don't notice that something happened, it doesn't bother you, right? Like it's not a thing. That's the effect that these backyard cottages or these small houses have, because they can be fit in anywhere. The thing about them is they rarely stay this size. Because what happens is that you get started and then you save up a little bit of money and you put an addition on the back. And you have a kid and you put a second story on. We nostalgize this as like the barn raising, hey, my neighbor comes over and helps me and I go over and help them. But it's literally like how people built housing. Again, try to finance a 400 square foot home, can't do it. We need more and more of these. So at Strong Towns, what we have said is there's 3 things that need to happen to make this kind of housing occur. The first thing is we need code reform. We need to actually change the regulations on this stuff. The second thing that needs to happen is we need people to build it. We need incremental developers. And the third thing that needs to happen is we have to actually finance this stuff locally. And when I say finance it locally, I mean we need local government to, at scale, be the people who inject the capital into the system. And let me be very clear, because at Strong Towns, we're very insistent that local government be financially prudent. Local governments need to be able to do this at little to no risk and not lose any money doing it. Let's walk through this. And I'm going to go through this a little bit quick so we can get to Q&A. But we need regulatory reform in a big way. Strong Towns has put together a series of toolkits kind of walking cities through how to do all these things. Regulatory reform, there's really 6 things that every city needs to do. And I don't think this is a comprehensive list, but this is a list of like, if you want to be ready for housing in your city, you're doing these 6 things. You're allowing single family conversions by right. So we can take that extra bedroom and make it into an accessory apartment. That's easy. You're allowing backyard cottages. You're allowing starter homes. You are getting rid of your minimum lot size requirements in your existing neighborhoods so that the lots can be flexibly used to accommodate this housing. And you're getting rid of your parking minimums so that we don't have to be burdened with storing more cars than people in our cities. The last thing is, from a process standpoint, we need cities to get down to a 24-hour or less permit approval process. I want to clarify, because city people always freak out when I say this. I've actually had people curse at me when I said this, like the F word in the middle of my presentation. I am not saying that cities need to approve the next Walmart or Costco or 50-unit subdivision or 12-story tower condo in 24 hours. I'm saying that if someone wants to build a backyard cottage, put their extra bedroom as a rental unit, or build a small house, that you should have a separate alternative process that is so super easy that someone can show up with a completed application that shows you everything you need to know, and you can get that approved really quickly. That is a doable thing. We've created a checklist. I'll give you the website at the very end, but basically we've invited cities who want to be leaders on housing to do these things, and we have dozens of them across the country now that have taken these 6 things to heart and done them. Very heroic. The second thing I said is we need to nurture the people who do this. Who's going to build this housing? Oftentimes we get stuck because we think it's the developers that we have now. The developers we have now are all making good money building housing that is the housing we finance. They're all tied into the finance system, and they're all doing work within that system. They are not going to come and do your infill. They're not going to come and do your small houses, your backyard cottages. It's not what they're going to do. We actually need to get people off the sidelines who would do this kind of work. We went out and interviewed people who were doing it and asked, what's your story? And what we found is that, we created 6 categories. I'll give you the do-it-yourself innovator. Noah is a teacher. You know what he does in the summer? He builds a little house. He does a backyard cottage. He's like a side project, right? That's what he does. The creative entrepreneur, the industry professional who wants to do this kind of work. Basically, these are people who are on the sidelines of the system that are interested in doing this. They see the house across the street they'd like to fix up, but they're nervous about it. They're not sure if they can do it. They're not sure if they can pull it off. We need to get those people off the sidelines. When we ask what's holding them back, we get the same kind of things, right? The process is really complex. There's a lot of uncertainty. I'm not sure that people really want me to succeed. And so the problems that people face are not, I can't get the money, I can't get the capital, I can't like pound a nail. It's always like, I don't really know how to do this. I want to do it. I know how to do part of it, but I don't know how to do all of it. This is actually just a human problem that is easily solvable. In the book, we actually have a whole chapter on cities that have solved this and how they went about doing it. I'm going to give you a few tips. And again, the toolkit has like step by step by step. We have to show people where to start. That's probably like the biggest thing we heard from people is like, I want to do this, I don't know where to begin. And when I go into City Hall, on Monday, I get a different answer than on Tuesday and a different answer than on Wednesday. We actually need to just say, if you're going to build this type of thing, here's the 3 steps. Here's where you start. We need to make the process proportional to what they want to do. It's astounding that in most cities today, the process for building a backyard cottage is the same process for building a 20-story apartment building. You start with this person, then this person, then this person. These things should be really easy, and the process should be really easy. We have to link people to knowledge and to one another. And this is probably the most subtle part of this. In the book, we talk about South Bend, Indiana. South Bend, Indiana did this astounding thing where they just said, anybody who's interested in doing incremental development in your neighborhood, we're going to have a monthly meeting for you to just talk about this. We'll order pizza, we'll have some pop, just show up. And they would bring in someone to talk for 15 minutes, but then they would just let all the people in the room chat with each other. And the amazing thing that happened out of this is that people started to solve each other's problems. Incremental development is like being like a Renaissance person, right? You got to know like a little bit about a lot of things. And people know, like, I know this part, but I don't know this part. And what happens when you get in a room with people like this is you'll say, yeah, I'm really struggling. I can't figure out. I went to this plumber. The price is really high. Which plumber did you use? Oh, this guy. Oh, you don't use him. Like, he doesn't get it. Here's a guy over here that gets this style of development. Go talk to him. I'm having trouble getting this thing financed. Well, what bank are you using? I'm talking to these guys. No. Here's my banker over at this place. He's like set up to finance. He knows what you're doing. Go talk to him. And what happens is, not only do they solve each other's problems, but they grow demand in all of those side support industries that are essential to making this work. So all of a sudden you have a whole fleet of carpet layers and flooring and plumbers and electricians who aren't tied into the big development doing like the same thing over and over. They've created these side hustles that grow into full businesses that are serving this ecosystem of economic developers or incremental developers. What you have to do is you have to get them together. And when you get them together, magic happens. This other little magic thing that we saw, and this was in South Bend, but it was also in a number of cities that we saw in Michigan and other places, where literally they would just have like incremental developer Tuesday. And Tuesday afternoon, if you were gonna do one of these incremental projects, you go to City Hall, and in the room is everybody you need to talk to. And they would all bring their laptops, because if no one was there, they had work to do. But if someone was there, you could go to the building official and the zoning official and the fire official and everybody just around the room and get it all done right there. They didn't do that for the 20-story condo guy. They did that for the incremental developers. It didn't cost the city any money. It didn't cost the city any time. They just said, we're going to make these people accessible here to answer your questions, to get you processed, to get you through quickly. Very, very easy stuff. And then the financing. This is the big thing. So the second toolkit is also, I'm working on the third toolkit right now, and this one is not out. And I'm stressed because I promised it would be out in the first half of the year, and the way I looked, we're done with the first quarter of the year, so that means I have 3 months left, and let me give you some of the things that are going to be in this. And I'll go through this quick because then we should do Q&A. Remember I said, if cities are going to finance this stuff, let me put it like this. In the Great Depression, the federal government stepped in to fill a gap in the market. That gap has now become the market. And it's created another gap in the market. The federal government's not going to step in to fill that gap. The state government is very unlikely to step in to fill that gap. But cities have massive capacity to actually fill that gap. And it's strange to talk about this because there's a certain, I think people kind of look at this as like, well, do we really want local government in the financing and banking business? And I'm like, do you know how local governments operate today? I mean, local governments are, if you've ever gotten an assessment on a place, that's like the local government financing your infrastructure for you. Local governments do crazy tax subsidies that lose money all the time. What I'm talking about is we can fill this gap in the housing market, and we can do it with almost no risk to taxpayers, superficial risk, and we can do it at scale without losing money. Let me give you just a couple examples. So, this is Oswego, New York. That's Paul Stewart in the front left, beautiful guy. They created this program to fund in neighborhoods that were struggling. So neighborhoods that were having a difficult time getting liftoff. He actually said there's a bank run on confidence in these neighborhoods. They created a micro grant program. Grants as low as $25, maximum of like $400. If you wanted to do something that would make your house look better from the street, you could paint your house, you could replace the windows, you could put on new siding or fix your roof, you could plant flowers, whatever it was. Here was the trick. You cannot apply as an individual. You can only apply as a block. And on the block, you have to have 70% of the homes participating or you don't qualify. So what happened in neighborhoods where there was a bank run on confidence, people had to go out and talk to their neighbors about things they wanted to do to make the block look better. What this did is it injected confidence back into the system. Because all of a sudden, what would happen is that one block in this kind of blighted, rundown neighborhood would look better. Not one house, not two houses, a whole block, just bam, would look better. And then a couple months later, bam, another block would look better. And then the next summer, 3 more blocks would look like better. And what happened was people living in the neighborhood started to believe in the neighborhood, and even without the subsidy, would take their own time and their own money and dedicate it to making the neighborhood better. Here's the coolest thing about this. They have invested over the life of this project, which has been going on for I think 15 years now. I want to say like $500,000 total. They have created something like $60 million of property value appreciation, and it has gone to the people who live in the neighborhood. This is not a story of dislocation. This is not a story of people coming in and investing money and then people have to leave and like new people come in. This is wealth that has accrued by literally helping people take their own energy off the sidelines and believe in their neighborhood. In Muskegon, Michigan, they did something that I thought was super innovative. They used tax increment financing, which is one of the most widely abused and horribly destructive tools that local governments have. Local governments waste bizarre sums of money chasing commercial development with tax increment financing. They used it to build entry-level housing. Here's what they said. If you will build a 800, I think it was like 800 was the max, but it was not like 1,000 square feet out of the cul-de-sac. If you build an 800 square foot home in an existing neighborhood on existing utilities, so planners, we might call this infill. If you build that, we, the city, will make your down payment for you. And we will do that using tax increment financing. So when you go to closing, say your house is $200,000 when it's built, the city will pay $40,000 of that. And here's what the city does. The city goes and borrows that $40,000. They give that to the bank to make your payment. Then your house has a tax increment financing package on it. So before, when it was raw ground, you were paying this much taxes. Now you're paying this much tax. They will take that money and they will use that money to pay back the loan. They write in a clawback provision, so if you sell the house, they get the money back, right? So you can't like flip the house. But if you stay there for the life of it, which generally turns out to be like 12 or 15 years, that's completely yours. They have built dozens of houses in their neighborhoods using this and gotten all kinds of people into housing that otherwise would not. In Minnesota, we're allowed to use special assessments to do the same thing. So if you want a backyard cottage, the city can actually finance it for you. It will be at low interest rates. Go to the bank and get financing for a backyard cottage. You're going to be paying 8, 9, 10%. A city can borrow money at like 2.5%, 3% today. We can finance it for you at much lower rates. We can spread those payments out. We can make sure you stay in it. We can even do it kind of like a long thing so that you really don't have to pay for it until you move. We can get that housing unit on. And again, let me say on both of these, the Michigan one and this one, when I say low risk, it's not zero risk, but it's near zero risk. And let me tell you why. If you do a special assessment, if you have a house with a mortgage and a secondary mortgage, what happens is that if you default, the primary mortgage gets paid off, and if there's money left over, the secondary mortgage gets paid off, right? We all get that. If you do an assessment or a tax increment financing, that goes ahead of the first mortgage. So if the property owner defaults, the city gets made whole before anybody else does. That's not zero risk, but that's as close to zero risk as you're going to get. In Florida, we ran into a developer who worked with a city and with a philanthropic organization to co-sign on these loans. So I said, local banks won't finance this stuff. They won't, because they're not the products that they can sell off on the market. So they would have to hold the loan, and they're loath to hold the loan, right? So what the city has done is gone to the bank and said, look, we as a city have 50 million, 100 million, 200 million, whatever it is, dollars that come into our city every year in taxes that we have to put in a bank somewhere. We will put that in your bank. That will give you lots of liquidity, lots of money. We will keep it in your bank, but we want you to write these loans. And we know these are not the kind of loans you want to hold, so we will co-sign it, or this philanthropic organization will co-sign on it, so that if there is a default, you're going to be made whole. So we're going to give you the money to lend out, and you're not going to take any risk. And this has been very successful. Please.
Can I ask what city in Florida this is?
I can't remember. It is a city near Jacksonville. It's on the Atlantic side, and I can't remember the name of it. But it's a developer and a philanthropic organization that brought this to me. And I can't remember the name of the city, but it's not Jacksonville, but it's a city like just north of there.
Interesting, 'cause I'm also from Florida.
Oh, okay.
We're experiencing a major housing crisis.
Yes, although in Florida, that's the place where housing is dropping the most right now. So buckle up, you might not have a housing crisis. These are the toolkits. If you are interested in more of this, strongtowns.org/housing ready is all of these kind of packaged up. What happened is I wrote this book, right? And then I went out on a book tour, and I thought the book kind of explained all this. And I ran into mayor after mayor after mayor, or local leader, whatever, who would say, okay, what do we do first? And I'm like, read the book. And they're like, I read the book. And I'm like, okay, that's my problem then. And so we put these toolkits together as like a way to get started. So if you're trying to, you're like, I want to do this, here you go, housing ready. strongtowns.org/housing ready. And let me just close with this. I do feel like the thing that I get wherever I go is, when it comes to housing, is a certain level of desperation and a feeling of like a loss of agency, right? This problem feels bigger than what we can accomplish. And I get that. We don't set 30-year mortgage rates. We don't decide what housing costs. We don't get to determine that at the local level. We are, in a sense, powerless because this highly financialized housing market goes beyond what we locally can control. But here's what I want to say. We are not powerless. We can actually fill the unmet demand in our market, get a lot of people into housing at prices they can afford. And when we do that, when we strengthen that part of the market, what we do is we create a whole class of people in our community that are no longer desperate. They're no longer desperate. They're no longer homeless. They no longer can't get in a place. But even more than that, they're no longer desperate in the sense that they can now start to save money. They can now start to set money aside. They can now start to create their own equity and their own nest egg. So when they do decide to enter the housing market as we see it today, they don't do it from a place of desperation. They do it from a place of strength. When our residents are desperate, that's when you get taking on more loan than they can manage, stretching themselves too thin, overbidding because they're worried that they lost the last 5 houses they tried to get and they got to get into something. We've all heard this, right? This is the desperation people get into. What we want is we want our people to have strong finances so that when they enter that market, they dictate the terms. Because if they don't get the terms they want, they can stay in a stable situation. They're not in a place where their landlord's jacking up their rent every month. They're not in a place where they can't save money. They're not in a place where they're falling further and further behind every month. They might not be in the optimum place they want to be, but they're not in a place where they're desperate. And if we solve that desperation problem, what we will see is that the overall housing market here locally will have to respond to us instead of to distant money people. Thanks for being here tonight. Thanks for inviting me. If you need to go, this is Minnesota. I know it is sometimes thought of as like rude to get up and walk out. It is not rude, so feel free if your time has expired here. I don't know how much time we have. I realize I went a little long, but you guys have microphones, right? Yeah. I am more than happy to talk about any topic that you all want to talk about, as long as it is like strong towns related. Like I think Arizona will beat Michigan, but I only say that because my daughter goes to Arizona. I don't have any insight. Artemis, I'm assuming, is still in orbit somewhere, and we don't have problems there, so. Go ahead, who's got a question? Up top. Up top. We've got some.
Oh, you're gonna hold it? Oh, great, thank you. So I just have a question. You haven't published the Financing the Housing Ready City yet, but I'm curious, do you talk about property taxes in that to help people stay in their homes when their property taxes are rising?
In the third one?
In the third one, yes.
No, no. I am gonna write an article about about property taxes though soon, because we're having this, this debate in the country about property taxes, and right now, one of the things that Team Red really wants is to eliminate property taxes because they're, immoral, like you shouldn't be taxed on your property. I'm really interested to see what Team Blue thinks about this. I'm gonna tell you something, and I don't really know how to solve this problem. If you read my first book, it's about the finances of cities. And I say in there very explicitly, our cities in North America have grown themselves into insolvency. If you hang out with strong towns any amount of time, this is a recurring theme. We created this tool last year called the Finance Decoder, where we actually looked at city balance sheets and plotted up over time their fiscal health. We evaluated over 100 cities. We only found one that was not insolvent, like desperately insolvent. If you look at the trajectories of all of our major cities, their finances is straight down. And so the question that I have for the eliminate property tax people is, how do we pay for this stuff? I think that the answer that I will get, I think the answer that is like out there, is we'll do for city government what we've done for education in this state, which is we'll get rid of the local tax part and we'll just make it all state funded. And you're shaking your head. I don't think that works for, I mean, I get the theory behind it. I have not seen that like work in practice. And like part of the reason is that it will eliminate racial disparities across places. And I've been to Eden Prairie High School. It's pretty insane. You know, like I don't see that actually happening, but that was the idea 25 years ago of getting rid of property tax for schools. I don't get how it would work. I also am sympathetic to the idea that property taxes are unaffordable, and when they go higher, they're going to be even more unaffordable. When you have created insolvent local governments, and by insolvent, I mean, let me give you the first book in 30 seconds. When you build a new subdivision, all the costs for doing it are generally paid by someone else, not the city. The developer pays for the sewer and water and all that. It's rolled into the price of the home. The person buys it in a mortgage. They pay it off over 30 years. The city gets all the tax revenue, the hookup fees, the utilities. From the city standpoint, tons of cash, no expense. You got a 10-year-old pipe, it doesn't cost you anything. You got a like 15-year-old sidewalk, it's just sitting there. It doesn't cost you anything, okay? So new development is great. The problem is those bills come due. And when they come due all at once. We grew for 10 years. We had 30 years of like, yay, and then bam, all that stuff starts to fall apart at the same time. And what happens is you turn around and you say, okay, taxes need to go up. We're gonna take on a lot more debt. And what happens to all the affluent people in your community? They move on to the next new building out place. And you're left with less affluent people with much higher costs. That spirals over time, and you wind up taking on lots of debt, and you wind up cutting services. And that's where we see most local governments in. This is not a government is bad problem. This is not a people are cheap problem. This is the way we build cities is not financially productive enough to sustain itself problem. And so there's no combination of tax increases or service cuts that actually get you to fixing that. The only way you fix that is to actually add more productivity per foot of public expense. Planners call this density. I hate using that term because planners do density horribly. What it is, we talk about neighborhoods maturing and thickening up. But the problem is, the symptom is your property taxes seem really high. And populist politicians can say, eliminate property taxes and that will solve the problem. Well, okay, like I can cut your property tax to zero and then not maintain your park, not mow your, not plow your street, not, call the fire department, they don't show up. Like we can run that government. There's a great book on the insolvency of Detroit. And, if you want a preview of coming attractions for most North American cities, Detroit is it. Detroit was the first city to grow in this pattern. They're the first city to reach the bankruptcy that comes from it. But I think the sad part of Detroit is not the bankruptcy, it was the decades of disservice to their people that preceded that. Because at some point in this process, what happens to local government is local government becomes predatory on its people because it tries to save itself rather than serve people in the community. And that's where I feel like we're in so many places. So no, I don't talk about property tax in the toolkit, but it is an issue we need to discuss. Please, I'm taking too long with my answers. Up here, go for it.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say I agree with the 6 main premises of the Housing Ready City Toolkit. I think they're great. I love the simplicity. The one problem that I can potentially see is the misaligned incentives with, you think of the suburbs, obviously Minneapolis has done a lot of those things.
Yeah.
But you think the suburbs, you have mostly people that own their homes, that a lot of their wealth is in their home, and they feel, it's part of the wealth is like the scarcity, right? So how do you incentivize those people to effectively, I don't want to say vote against their own interests, but it would be some localized hurt versus the benefit goes to kind of the metro area as a whole if you like build more housing in that city. So I guess, how do you convince them to do what's best for the like next generation as a whole, while also maybe taking a little hit on their like scarcity value of their house?
So I just realized we're streaming this. I'm happy we are streaming this. Everybody who's watching this being streamed, I'm happy you're here. I was going to say something in private to all of you, but I'll say it. I'll say a public version. So there is and let's just call it a YIMBY viewpoint, the Yes in My Backyard group, that, and this is a very popular, and if you listen, it's been picked up by national politicians because it fits the housing trap. It reinforces the trap that prices are high because of housing scarcity. There is absolutely no doubt that if you live in a major metro area where a lot of people want to be, if you live in San Francisco, there's not enough housing, and they're not building enough housing. If you live in Manhattan, there's not enough housing, and they're not building it fast enough. My counter argument to both of those places is there is no volume of housing that could be built that would satisfy demand. It's kind of like Venice. Like, how do you build more Venice? Like, you just have it, and then 2 million people fight over it every year. And prices are insane. Like, how do you build more Manhattan? My argument has always been you build a better Cincinnati, and you build a better Columbus, and a better Philadelphia, and I think what we're doing here is a better Minneapolis. If you look nationally, and there have been some, I think, really credible, studies on this, although I'm not real keen on some of the housing studies. But if you just look at like Federal Reserve data of population, housing units per population, we are in an upward trend that has been going on since 2012, and we are at levels that are higher than we were in 2008. So in some statistics, there is not a, quote, housing shortage. I would argue that there is a huge misallocation in that we have an excessive number of, 2 out of 3 households or more are 1 and 2 person households. 2 out of 3 homes are single family homes with multiple bedrooms. So what we actually have is like a mismatch between the housing stock we have and the housing stock we need. But you raise a question about like people going against their own interests. And this is the part where I want to be careful about how I say this. If you read the housing toolkit, okay, be generous with me here for a second. All right, I'll say this. Here's how I described it to my team, and so we're all on the same page. When I was in school here, and right when I graduated, we were having a debate in this state about marriage equality. Every major politician was not for gay marriage. Everyone. Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, like go through the list. They're all against gay marriage. We had it on the ballot here because it was seen as a watershed issue that would get a certain voter demographic out that would support politicians who were in office at that point in time. We were one of the first states to reject that. We were, a statewide ballot initiative. And I would argue that the reason we rejected it, and this is the part where I'm going to ask you to be generous with me, is that gay marriage became less about, in that debate and in that time and in that conversation, became less about gay pride parades and feather boas, et cetera, and more about the kind old lady who lived next door with her partner who wanted to be able to visit someone in the hospital when they were sick. In other words, it became the avatars of the discussion were very normal, and the things they were asking for seemed very moral human, not, I'm going to use a word again, I want you to be generous with me. It went from being something that was portrayed as a deviancy to something that was portrayed as a loving, caring thing that normal people you could relate to everywhere do. From a housing standpoint, there's this thing about how do we get people to go against their own self-interest? And I think we approach it wrong. And I watch the YIMBY organizations do this a lot, where the bad guy is the NIMBY, and we can create them as the avatar, and we can box against them and try to mobilize our crew and have this like war. If you read our stuff on housing and if you read our toolkits, what we try to do is make that next increment of stuff, the entry level, as like normal and accessible as possible. I put up a picture of a nice old lady in a nice little home. Why did I do that? Because she doesn't offend any of us. And if she's struggling to fix her roof and she's struggling to fix her furnace, and we can have a nice strapping young college boy move in there and shovel her sidewalks for her and help her. She can tend her garden and go play bridge with her friends. Like, is that not like the most wholesome thing possible? Like, why don't we just have that as like our avatar of the discussion we're trying to have? And yes, it is also going to allow the abusive husband who is a drunk who got kicked out of his house a place to live someday. It's going to allow the wife and daughter who are trying to escape abuse have a place to stay. We don't need to make them like the avatar of the conversation. We just know that they're also going to be taken care of. And so I do think that I kind of reject the notion that this is against someone's self-interest. I actually think there are a lot of people who are desperate to stay in their homes. And if they were presented with options that didn't seem like they offended, or let me use the same word I used before, didn't feel like they were deviant to their neighbors, but actually were just providing like a wholesome option that everybody could, say that's not offensive to me. I think as an umbrella to a discussion, that would bring in a lot of good, that would help a lot of people. So that's how I think about that. Please. You guys are gonna have to be quicker on the draw because I'm not sure where you want to go here. Everybody's pointing. We're up here.
So regarding is this on? Regarding the financing question. So I have a question. I'm wondering, have you seen any instances of the use of real estate investment cooperatives being created?
Yeah.
We've got a number of them here in like in St. Paul.
Yeah.
Taproot is in the creative enterprise zone, and they raised $300,000 with a very short ask, but it was all targeted towards investing in commercial properties within the creative enterprise zone, not for housing, but for investing in properties for creatives. I've got $10,000 in that because I have that money sitting around.
Yeah.
I'm not expecting any return on that, right?
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
4%, maybe someday, or not.
Yeah.
But I invested in it because I wanted to invest in my community.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Right? So could we are things like that happening for creating this kind of housing? Do you see it?
Okay, let me tell you the one place that I am seeing it. I'm seeing churches do it. And one of the reasons why I think churches are more successful at this is that when I'm a Catholic, when the priest comes to you and says, hey, we need you to donate for a new rectory or a school addition or an addition to the church, that's a donation. And they can do the shakedown on you and kind of make you do that, right? When the priest comes to you and says, hey, I know you have a lot of money. I'm not asking you to donate. I'm asking you to invest in this housing project that will provide housing for people who need it. You will get a return. It might be zero, but it's not likely to be negative, and it might be a little bit positive. Will you put your money to work here? That's a pretty good ask. And you get a bit of a tax write-off, right? So that's a good ask because you're not asking people to like actually donate money. You're just asking them to place their capital here instead of here. So I think churches find this like more fluid to do. I have some qualms. In 2 weeks, I'm going to the UK for a week, and I've got a bunch of things scheduled. And one of them is I'm going to this cooperative that supposedly has been around for like 300 years or something like this, and is very successful. You familiar with this? They told me it's by the big Ferris wheel in London. I'm supposed to go walk through this neighborhood, and I'm getting a tour and explain to me how the finances work. If we had to define the post-war development pattern different than the pre-depression development pattern, most people talk about the automobile, and I think that's incorrect, because you can travel all over Europe and see a different development pattern, and they have automobiles, right? To me, the defining characteristic of pre-war development pattern is that now we build all at once, and we build to a finished state. Pre-Great Depression, everything was iterative. We built small, and then we matured over time and in place. The cooperative model, to me, raises a lot of red flags, because we need our neighborhoods to be dynamic and adaptive. We actually need them to become complex adaptive systems, the way that they were in the past, so we can respond to stress and opportunity. The cooperative model solves a short-term problem, and I think by giving us a long-term problem, which is it locks in a development model that is difficult to change and adapt. I'm interested in looking at this one in London, because what I've been told is that it does change and adapt, and it is a cooperative model. So I want to see it. But the ones I've seen here in North America tend to just, in a sense, freeze the thing in amber in a different way. So, yeah.
Chuck, I want to take one or two more questions, but my stomach's rumbling and I want to get to this food out.
Okay, yeah, good. We got food.
I wanted to challenge the idea that you can't build to a finished state. I've identified 37 sites in the Twin Cities.
Uh-huh.
You know, one of them's, half a mile away from here. Another one's a couple miles downriver.
Yeah.
And they vary from 20 acres to 120 acres. You know, when I look at building ADUs in the already built environment,
Yeah.
I don't think you can deliver it for under $300,000, which isn't really very affordable. And I'm wondering if we can't work.
I know people who have built them in Minneapolis for $50,000, but go ahead.
Everybody I've talked to who's tried to do it tells me that you just can't. I mean, maybe if you're out pounding the nails yourself and you're
Yeah, these are people who are crazy, like incremental developers. I'm not.
that's great, Chuck, but how
Yeah.
do we, at scale, I mean, 72% of our households are one or two people with no kids. And they want a different quality of housing. How do we do that at scale if we're, looking for the corner lot and depending on people who can swing a hammer?
Yeah.
I mean, why not get back to the old Sears model, get pre-approved plans?
I think pre-approved plans are a great strategy. Yeah, I think it's a great strategy. Let me answer your question, because I think it's an important one, and it goes to a deep, philosophical divide that I think we at Strong Towns have with the way we do business across a broad variety of categories. I was at UC Santa Barbara 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, as part of a conference there. I was invited to give a talk and then do a panel with a guy who was with California Forever. Have you MERP students studied California Forever? It's like the brand new city that the tech people want to build north of Silicon Valley. It's build all at once to a finished state. It is like the new Brasilia, like all the smartest people are working on this. And we had this, I won't call it a debate, because I don't think we argued as much as just presented like a different take on it. And I was asked the scale question, and my answer was a bit metaphorical, but I'll give it here. I said, at the beginning of World War II, the Germans advanced very quickly into France and drove the British up to Dunkirk and trapped them in. And were pounding them on the beach. And the British sent the Navy, because they had the biggest Navy in the world, in to evacuate these 300,000 troops. And it couldn't be done. The big ships were inefficient. They couldn't adapt, they couldn't move, they were like sitting ducks. If you watched Harry Styles in the movie, you get a taste of what this looked like. What solved that problem? It was the merchant marine. It was the little ships. It was the fishing boats. Yeah. And they sent like thousands of them, hundreds of them. And, they were able to, in a sense, not be big targets to attack, not slow lumbering things. They did a whole lot and, completed the job and evacuated the troops. I think of like forests, and I recognize that we can chop down a tree and take off the branches and chop it up and, make that happen. If you've ever been in a forest where the aphids come through, you can actually stand on the ground and hear them crunching. It's really eerie. And you come back the next day and there's no leaves. And you never even see them. They literally just eat it all. I think that we have the scale issue backward. I think if we want fast and at scale, you're talking many small ships iterating. I think if we want efficient from a capital flow standpoint, you're talking the big ships. And I think that it's the wrong device for the problems we have. I recognize that's a minority opinion. So your opinion is by far the majority opinion. It is not my take.
I've been dealing with the cost problem for 40 years.
Yeah.
And I think that, there's going back to the, some version of the get home where you can go in and get something in a day.
Yeah, I hear this and I get, I talk to a lot of developers at the time who do these kind of projects, and they'll say, well, Chuck, the land is really expensive. And I'll say, like, the land's really expensive because you're paying a lot for the land. But if I don't pay a lot for the land, I don't get the land. And there's a part of me that gets it, but when you start adding up all the vacant land, the supply-demand economics are not working because there's an excess supply of developable land. It is.
And I can't build that ADU for 50 grand.
Yeah. I think that I look at my engineering friends over here, and I will say the price of bituminous is bloated, the price of aggregate is bloated, the price of concrete is bloated, and it's bloated because the supply chain is efficient and non-competitive, and itself is non-responsive to price signals. And I think what we see through all the building industries is that same kind of thing. In the lumber industry, what have we had? Consolidation. And you have a lot of price insensitivity. If we went back to that era where the prices were going down, what did you have? You had, 500 lumber mills in every state.
But we don't have that anymore. We don't have builders who build.
No, but when I talk about creating an ecosystem of incremental developers, what I'm actually talking about is building another layer of people solving these problems in different ways.
Guys,
Last question?
I think we can have
That's
this
it?
conversation all night, but I'm getting billed by the hour for this space.
Okay.
So we got to wrap it up. We got to eat some food. Let's thank Chuck one more time for his time tonight. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I want to thank Isaac up in the booth running the show tonight. I want to thank Rachel Leatham for helping us put this together. Sam Behrens and Pasta, Itzo, Musa, our undergrad friends at Musa. Everybody who helped us put this together tonight. There's food outside in the lobby. Please hang out. Let's keep having these conversations. Let's keep discussing the issues. Thank you, guys.